There is something subtle yet powerful about the door you keep closed. Not just the door to your home, but the one to your inner world. And the question is, why do you keep it closed? Most people say it's because they enjoy their privacy. They say they like their own space, that they need time to recharge. And yes, there's value in solitude, no doubt, but there's also something deeper underneath this resistance to having others enter our space. Because very often, the state of your outer world reflects the condition of your inner world. And when the soul is unsettled, when the energy inside is chaotic, cluttered, or fearful, the natural reaction is to close the door, not to others, but to ourselves. The way you treat your home is never just about furniture or design. It's the energy you allow to settle there. And when someone knocks, when someone appears at your threshold, what rises in you? Is it calm, openness, or tension and resistance? When you keep that door closed and say, "I don't like visitors," that statement is not just about them. It reveals something about what you're not ready to face within yourself. We often think we're protecting our peace by keeping people out, but sometimes we're simply avoiding the discomfort that arises when we feel exposed. Having a visitor, someone stepping into your environment, brings a kind of confrontation, not always with the person, but with your own state of being. Suddenly, the room you didn't clean, the energy you didn't clear, the silence you're used to, all of it gets stirred. And that stirring is not always pleasant, because it shows you what you've been suppressing. A still soul doesn't panic when someone enters. A grounded soul doesn't feel invaded. But if your reaction to a knock on the door is stress, irritation, or a tightening in the chest, maybe it's time to ask, what am I protecting so fiercely inside myself? What am I unwilling to share or even acknowledge? Sometimes the door we keep shut is a boundary, and that's healthy. But sometimes it's a wall we've built out of fear, trauma, mistrust, or a deep sense of insecurity. And the longer we keep it closed, the more disconnected we become, not just from others, but from life itself. You may say, "I'm just not a social person," but that identity too can become a shield, because human beings are relational by nature. Even monks, even sages, they withdraw to reflect, not to hide. So when you say, "I don't like having visitors," stop for a moment and listen to what your soul is actually saying. Is it seeking silence to realign itself? Or is it avoiding something uncomfortable? Something about being seen, being known, being vulnerable. A visitor doesn't just step into your living room, they step into your presence. And if that presence is unsettled, it will feel like disturbance. But the disturbance didn't come from them. It was already there. This is why your relationship with space matters. The energy of your room, your home, your environment, these are all expressions of the unseen world within you. You can light candles, hang symbols, play soft music, but if your mind is in chaos, the space won't feel peaceful. And when someone steps into that, you'll feel exposed, not because they did something wrong, but because your soul is unprepared to be transparent. True strength is not in shutting the door. It's in knowing that you can open it without losing your center. It's in understanding that a peaceful soul doesn't fear being entered, because there is nothing chaotic left to disturb. And yes, some people bring heavy energy. Some people don't align with your frequency, but even that becomes obvious only when your own vibration is clear. So the next time you say, "I don't like having visitors," reflect deeper. Ask what part of you is speaking. Is it wisdom or is it fear? Is it solitude or is it avoidance? Because in the end, the door you keep closed may not be about your house at all. It may be about the space within you that is still asking to be seen, accepted, and brought into order. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to let that door open, if not for someone else, then at least for yourself. There's a difference between choosing solitude and escaping into it. On the surface, both can look the same. You withdraw, you spend time alone, you say no to invitations, you limit your interactions. But the intention behind that choice makes all the difference, because one brings clarity, and the other slowly builds a wall around you that even you can't see through anymore. Solitude, when chosen consciously, is powerful. It allows you to hear yourself, to observe your thoughts without noise, to realign with your values. It is where your inner compass becomes sharp again. But when you isolate yourself not from choice, but from fear, that same solitude turns into a prison. It numbs rather than refines. And it keeps you in the illusion that being alone is safer than being seen. There are many people who say they prefer to be alone, and it may be true, in part. But often, if we're really honest with ourselves, we'll find that we've been using the idea of solitude as a shield. Not because we love silence, but because we don't know how to trust. Not because we're at peace, but because connection feels risky. Because the moment we open up to others, something inside us starts to feel exposed. Ask yourself, when was the last time you enjoyed being alone? Because it nourished your soul, not because it helped you avoid discomfort. Can you sit in silence without feeling lonely? Can you say no to a gathering without resentment or defensiveness? Or is there a trace of bitterness, fear, or unresolved emotion behind your withdrawal? It's easy to confuse emotional numbness with calmness, but calmness has depth, awareness, and softness. Numbness is just a quiet kind of tension, and when we isolate ourselves without clarity, that tension builds in the background. The soul craves connection, but the mind builds barriers, and eventually, those barriers become habits. We stop answering messages. We keep our schedule full enough to stay unavailable. We say things like, "I just don't like people." But deep down, what we're really saying is, "I don't like how I feel when I'm with people." And that feeling is what needs our attention. Not the people, not the interaction, but the mirror it holds up to our emotional world. Because every connection, every relationship brings something up. It might be impatience, anxiety, judgment, or vulnerability. That's not a sign that others are the problem. It's a signal that something inside you still needs healing. Solitude should be a choice that strengthens you, not a strategy to avoid confrontation with your inner shadows. If you retreat from the world, do it to meet yourself more fully, not to hide from the parts of you that still ache. Because no matter how long you stay hidden, those parts will not disappear. They wait for the moment you're still enough to feel them, and that moment often comes when you're alone, not distracted, not busy, not scrolling, just still. But being still isn't always comfortable. It demands honesty. It brings up emotions that you've buried under routines and excuses. That's why many people say they love solitude, but in truth, they're afraid of it. Not the quiet, but what the quiet reveals. And so, they fill it with background noise, music, screens, distractions, anything to avoid being fully with themselves. And then, when someone tries to reach out, when someone knocks on the metaphorical door, it feels intrusive. Not because they're unkind, but because your inner world hasn't been prepared for company. It hasn't even been prepared for you. So the visitor becomes a threat, not to your peace, but to the illusion you've built around it. That's why it matters to examine the reason behind your solitude. Is it healing you, or is it hiding you? Are you using it to grow deeper roots, or are you using it to avoid storms? There is no shame in needing space, but there is danger in mistaking isolation for evolution. You don't need to be surrounded by people to feel alive, but you also don't need to push everyone away to protect your energy, because the soul that is truly at peace doesn't fear interaction. It doesn't see connection as an invasion. It welcomes presence because it has first become present with itself. And if you can sit in that space, fully honest, fully aware, then your solitude becomes sacred, not a shield, not a wound, but a place where your soul can breathe freely again. Every visitor is a test, not of your hospitality, but of your inner stillness. When someone enters your space, unannounced or even invited, they don't just cross the threshold of your home, they step into your presence. And in that moment, something is revealed. Not about them, but about you. The way you respond, the way your energy shifts, the thoughts that arise, These are all reflections of the state of your soul. A lot of people say they don't like visitors because it disrupts their peace. But peace that can be disrupted so easily was never peace. It was silence wrapped around tension. Real peace is not fragile. It doesn't crack when someone else enters the room. It doesn't vanish when the rhythm changes. It remains. It holds. It breathes calmly through every shift. When someone knocks on your door, the first reaction that surfaces is usually the most honest. Do you feel calm, open, ready to share space? Or do you feel defensive, irritated, unsettled? Do you immediately look for something to fix or hide, as if the presence of another person is a spotlight exposing all your unfinished business? That moment, right there, is not about the visitor. It's about your own relationship with stillness. A steady flame doesn't flicker just because a door opens. But if the flame is already weak, if the air inside is unstable, then yes, even the smallest breeze will cause it to shake. Most people don't realize this because they think the problem is external. They say, "This person drained me," or "I just can't handle being around others." But the truth is, the storm was already within. The visitor simply revealed it. What we call disturbance is often just a mirror. And every person who enters your space is holding that mirror up, whether they know it or not. They reflect back your level of presence, your level of acceptance, your internal dialogue. And it takes real strength to stay grounded when that mirror is placed in front of you. Think about it. If someone enters your space and your thoughts immediately spiral, what does that show? It shows that the surface was calm, but the depths were not yet settled. A soul that is truly rooted doesn't resist presence. It may set boundaries, it may prefer quiet, but it doesn't recoil from another being's existence. It doesn't see a visitor as a threat, because presence is never threatened by presence, only ego is. When someone visits, they don't just bring their body into the space, they bring their mood, their energy, their history. And yes, sometimes that energy is heavy, sometimes it stirs the air. But again, your reaction is not about them. It's about whether your foundation is strong enough to hold itself steady, no matter what is introduced into the atmosphere. This is where inner discipline matters. Not the kind you show off, not the kind that's all posture and words, but the quiet, consistent practice of staying with yourself, even when things feel uncomfortable. That's the discipline that transforms, and it shows itself most clearly when others arrive. Not when you're meditating alone, not when the house is silent, but when someone walks in talking, laughing, asking, expecting. Can you remain centered? Or do you start to contract? If you contract, it's not failure. It's just feedback. It's the universe showing you where you're still holding tension, where you still feel unsafe, and rather than resenting the person who interrupted your flow, you can thank the moment for showing you what still needs refining. That's the shift. That's when your home, your space, your very presence becomes a temple. Not because it's always silent, but because even when it isn't, the silence inside you remains untouched. And when that silence becomes strong, visitors no longer feel like tests. They become opportunities. Opportunities to observe, to refine, to welcome without losing yourself. You no longer fear being disrupted, because you've realized that nothing can truly disturb you when you are truly present. So the next time someone steps into your space, don't just look at them. Look at yourself, see what shifts, and know that what you feel in that moment is not a distraction from your practice. It is your practice. Boundaries are necessary. They create structure. They define the space in which your energy can rest, recharge, and realign. Without boundaries, your presence becomes scattered. You give too much, you take on too much, and eventually, you lose clarity on what belongs to you and what doesn't. But the purpose of a boundary is not to build a wall. It's to shape your freedom. It's to protect your peace, not from the world, but from your own tendency to lose yourself in it. And yet, there's a delicate line between having boundaries and being closed. When you say, "I don't want visitors," that may be an expression of self-care. But it could also be a mask worn by fear. Fear of being seen, of being disrupted, of being vulnerable. It's easy to claim the language of strength. I'm protecting my space. I'm guarding my energy. But are you really? Or are you just making sure no one gets close enough to stir the parts of you that still feel unstable? The soul that has clarity doesn't fear openness. It knows how to open and close the door with wisdom, not emotion. It knows when to allow someone in, not because it owes anyone anything, but because it is not afraid of being seen anymore. But when you are still tangled in your inner world, when your energy is unsettled, then openness starts to feel dangerous, and that's when boundaries become rigid. That's when you stop engaging not from choice, but from avoidance. You might think, but I know myself. I don't like people in my space. And maybe that's true. But knowing yourself also means questioning your habits. Not every instinct is wisdom. Some are defense mechanisms we've carried for so long. We've mistaken them for personality. There's a difference between "this is who I am" and "this is how I've learned to protect myself." It's not about letting everyone in. That would be chaos. Not everyone deserves a seat at your table. But if you shut every door and seal every window, soon even the air inside becomes stale. You weren't made to be cut off from life. You were made to engage with it wisely. Sometimes the presence of another person, especially someone who brings strong energy, is exactly what reveals the cracks in your own armor, and that's uncomfortable. But it's also useful. It shows you where your peace is still conditional. It shows you where your discipline is still depending on silence, not built into your being. The most powerful presence is one that can remain soft and open without becoming weak. It can allow someone in and still stand firm. It can offer space without compromising its core. That kind of presence doesn't react from fear. It responds from awareness. And that awareness isn't shaken by someone else's mood, words, or energy. It's steady. And because it's steady, it can afford to be kind. It can afford to be generous. It can afford to open the door, not because it has to, but because it's no longer afraid to. But that level of openness doesn't come from pretending to be welcoming. It comes from doing the inner work of clearing your space internally, so that when someone does enter, you're not thrown off. You're not defensive. You don't need to explain yourself or manage their impression of you. You're just there, grounded and clear. And if they align with that energy, they'll stay. If not, they'll leave. Either way, you remain at peace. Too many people confuse emotional avoidance with spiritual maturity. But closing yourself off and calling it a boundary doesn't make it wise. It just makes it quiet. And quiet isn't always the same as peaceful. True peace can speak. It can invite, it can engage. Because it knows itself so well, it's not afraid of being shifted. It has roots. So yes, create boundaries. Absolutely. But make sure those boundaries aren't coming from fear of life. Make sure they are shaped by awareness, not past wounds. Because when you finally learn the difference, you'll find yourself able to open the door, not because you need to, but because you finally can. When you look around your space, your room, your home, your environment, you're not just looking at furniture or decor. You're looking at an extension of yourself. The way your space is arranged, the energy it holds, the silence it carries, or the tension it traps. These are not random. They are reflections of the unseen parts of your soul. You can tell a lot about someone by the way they keep their space, not because of the objects in it, but because of the energy it either welcomes or resists. It's easy to say, I don't like having visitors. But if you dig deeper, ask yourself, what part of me feels disturbed when someone enters? Is it the mess? Is it the thought of being seen? Or is it that I feel something in the space is unfinished, unworthy of being witnessed? That discomfort is not about the guest. It's about you facing your own environment through someone else's eyes. When your space is in chaos, it's often a reflection of inner confusion. When it's too sterile, it may mirror emotional withdrawal. A room filled with clutter might be filled with unprocessed thoughts, A home that's dim and closed off might match a heart that hasn't been open for a while. And the truth is, when we avoid having visitors, it's often because we're not ready for someone to walk into the atmosphere we've been silently building around us. It's not just about what they'll see, it's about what you'll feel. Because when someone else steps into your space, suddenly everything becomes louder. The dust, the disorder, the silence you've grown used to. It all becomes visible, audible, undeniable. Not to them, but to you. And sometimes that's the real discomfort. It's not about being judged by others. It's about being confronted by what you've stopped noticing. The energy of a space doesn't lie. You can clean the surfaces, you can light incense, you can rearrange furniture. But if the underlying energy hasn't been cleared, the space will still feel heavy, and people will feel it. You will feel it. That's why even the idea of someone entering your home can bring tension, because it threatens to disturb a fragile balance that was never truly balanced to begin with. Now, this isn't about having a perfect home or a spotless environment. It's not about presentation. It's about congruence. Does your outer space align with your inner space? Do you feel at ease sitting in your own room? Do you breathe easily there, or is your breath shallow? Do you feel inspired or just distracted? These questions are not about style, they're about spirit. When the soul is at peace, it creates environments that reflect that peace. And those spaces naturally invite presence. You don't have to prepare for a guest. You don't feel the urge to hide anything, because you're not hiding from yourself. The space feels open because the heart is open. And that openness doesn't mean chaos, it means readiness. A calm readiness to allow others in. Not because you need their approval, but because you're not afraid of being seen as you are. Some people think they need to fix the outer world before they can invite someone in. But very often, it's the invitation that clears the space. It's the presence of another that helps you recognize what needs to be adjusted. Not out of shame, but out of awareness. It's not about cleaning because someone's coming. It's about realizing that the space matters to your own spirit, too. So when you avoid visitors, pause and ask yourself, is it because your space is sacred and private, or is it because it doesn't feel safe to let someone else see the truth of it? Are you protecting your peace, or are you concealing your chaos? And if it's the second, that's not something to judge. It's something to acknowledge. Because once you see it clearly, you can begin to bring your space and your soul back into alignment. Your home doesn't need to be perfect, but it should feel true. And when it does, you won't feel the same resistance to being witnessed. You won't feel the need to keep the world out, because the moment your inner world feels whole, the outer world can enter, and nothing feels threatened anymore. How you relate to others is never just about them. It's always a reflection of how you relate to yourself, the way you react when someone enters your space, the way you speak, the way you hold or withhold presence. All of it reveals something deeper. And often, when you say, I don't like having visitors, what you're really saying is, I'm not comfortable being fully seen, even by myself. When you feel disturbed by someone else's presence, when you tense up at the idea of someone stepping into your world, it's rarely about what they're doing. It's about what their presence stirs in you. Maybe they speak too loud. Maybe they don't follow your rhythm. Maybe they bring emotions into the room that you've been avoiding. Whatever it is, their presence acts like a mirror, reflecting something that already exists within you. That mirror might reveal your impatience, your need for control, your desire to be left untouched. And the deeper truth is, you can't hold space for others if you haven't learned to hold space for yourself. When someone else enters your space, they bring unpredictability. But that unpredictability is only threatening if your own internal state is already fragile. If you've built your peace on silence, stillness, and routine, then yes, someone else's presence might feel like a disturbance. But if your peace is grounded in self-awareness, in real inner harmony, then you can welcome others without losing yourself. You see, the discomfort you feel around others is often just a sign that you haven't made peace with certain parts of yourself. If someone's energy feels too much, ask yourself, what part of me is resisting this? If I feel judged, am I actually judging myself? If I feel drained, have I been neglecting my own boundaries? These aren't easy questions, but they're necessary. Because the more deeply you understand yourself, the less threatened you become by the presence of others. Relationships are not just emotional, they are energetic. Every interaction is an exchange, and if your energy is unstable, interactions will feel exhausting. But when you have clarity inside, when your emotional body is clean and your mind is settled, others don't drain you. You simply observe, you notice, you stay rooted. You don't absorb what isn't yours, and you don't shrink when someone else expands. That kind of inner stability transforms the way you connect. Sometimes we shut people out not because they've done something wrong, but because we're afraid they'll see the parts of us we're still trying to hide. We're afraid they'll uncover what we haven't yet accepted. So we say it's about preference. We say it's about protecting peace, but often it's about fear of exposure, the fear of being known too deeply, too quickly. And until you build a relationship with yourself that is honest and compassionate, you'll keep others at a distance. Not to protect yourself from them, but to protect yourself from what they might awaken in you. That's the real work. Not just managing relationships, but understanding what those relationships are revealing. Every tension, every discomfort, every urge to withdraw, it's an invitation to turn inward, to look at what still feels unsettled. Because when the soul is whole, connection becomes natural. You don't need everyone to stay. You don't need constant interaction. But you also don't need to retreat in fear. You can engage without losing yourself. You can share space without being drained. You can listen without reacting. And you can say no without guilt, because it comes from clarity, not avoidance. The way you hold space for others will always mirror the way you hold space for yourself. If you meet yourself with judgment, you'll judge others. If you meet yourself with compassion, you'll respond with understanding. If you've spent time healing your own wounds, you won't be triggered when someone else's wounds enter the room. And that's what changes everything. Not just your relationships, but the entire quality of your presence. So the next time you feel discomfort around others, don't just look outward. Ask yourself what it's pointing to within. Because when you begin to treat your inner world with the care, respect, and stillness it deserves, you'll find that connection no longer threatens you. It nourishes you. And in that space, visitors aren't a disruption. They're simply passing through a soul that no longer fears being seen.